Ahavas Chesed. Today we are going to be continuing our discussion of what to do with the maaser money, the tithing money. We're also going to discuss what's known as chomesh, or the idea that you can give up to 20% for a purpose. There's a statement in the Talmud of Mavazbeis ma'osav al yavazbeis yoser mechomesh. If you're going to give away a ton of money, stop at 20%. So this is where we're going to kind of talk about some of these chapters. We are almost done with part 2 of Ahavas Chesed. Another 5 or 6 chapters left to go. So in discussing how to give out Meiser, for Meiser, it really is meant to go to tzedakah, to the charity itself, for aniyim. So just to kind of break up some of the words over here. So we had talked about how chesed can be done with money. Tzedakah is given with money. Meiser is specifically a subsection of tzedakah, because tzedakah is done specifically with money. So, which means the money has to go to poor people. And we talked about how other uses of maaser, of this maaser ksafim, the tithe for the money, could go to other related things, but the main thing is that it should go to the poor. So who gets that first? Well, just like we said with all the tzedakah, is that your relatives should get this maaser first. Okay? And so too with your adult children, okay? And also to not only give them tzedakah, but also to give them their maaser as well. So since they don't have from other people, they don't have their own job, so this really is tzedakah, okay? And so it's not like they are expected to go get money from elsewhere. You know, this is where you could go first, because this is the obligation. Tzedakah starts at home, okay? And a person can also go ahead and give their maaser money to their own parents, especially if they become impoverished. For example, they become too elderly to be able to take care of themselves and need help, okay? So, nonetheless, that basically a person who relies on public funds to take care of their own parents, that is someone should themselves experience some form of bad tides as a result of not taking care of one's own parents. Okay, now that's number one. Now, if your own relatives are not poor, you should then start giving to other poor people. And so the best people to give that to are people who are learning Torah all day long. So that way people should go ahead and continue to learn Torah all day long. Okay? So the reason why it says this is because there's a midrash that says that the main goal of giving Maaser Ksafim was enacted to keep the Torah scholars learning. And he quotes the Midrash Tanchuma. He says, remember we've quoted this previously, Aser to Aser, right? This is from that pasuk in Devarim. This is Devarim chapter 14, verse 22. Aser b'shol aser, right? Tithes that you should become rich. Give tithes that way you don't lack. Just like people who go ahead and engage in all forms of business. And the Midrash says that you should give this tithe to those who delve into Torah. And to this, the Torah will grant you that you should bring all of the maaser to, that we quoted this previously, these same verses, okay, that you should bring the money into the distribution house, and through doing that, the Kohanim and the Levium can go ahead and give amongst themselves, and that way they can continue focusing on Torah learning. And therefore, when it says, when you do that, you'll be blessed by Hashem with unending and boundless blessing. Okay? Because immediately following giving a Talmud Chacham, a person who learns Torah, money, they say in the Talmud that you find yourself to get more and more benefit for doing that. All right. Now, next stage is if you can't find to give all that money to people who learn Torah, so try to give most of that money to people learning Torah, or half that. Okay? And he says that I have found that this is also the opinion of the Knesset Hagadola, and the opinion of the Shita Mikubetzes, and that person should be giving to those who delve into Torah. That's section 1 over here. Section 2, the Ahavas continues that the later rabbis write that the next thing you should do is bring a chassan and kala to the chuppah. Okay, especially if they can't do it without needing money. So that's like level. So level 1, learning Torah. Level 2, what we call hachusus kula. You always hear that. If you hear somebody talking like that, they're coming from some place where they're not making any money, and they could because they're not learning Torah all day. But they're asking for that. For that, if they're not learning Torah all day, and they make the request like that, that's all you can give the money for. Okay. So that's the next best you can give it to. Another thing is you can help somebody make a bris, the suit of a bris, with money from maaser. You can also write svarim and allow them to be used by others and other people who can learn from those books as well. Okay, that you have to say that the books are given from the money of maaser, so that way people shouldn't think like, nope, they're yours. Some people don't like this, and it's discussed deeply in halacha. Okay, and so because the older custom was to only give to the poor, but there's what to say. Especially the Ahavas continues that if you're giving money to the father of the child, in order that he should be able to afford all of these things, then that's a good thing. And so too for hachnasas kala, for setting up a chuppah, if you help them to reach their goal of having the chuppah, in places where people couldn't do that, why avoid that? Because this really is tzedakah, he says. So the argument back and forth about whether or not you should do this for that is really meaningless. I mean, we do say also, he doesn't say it here for some reason, but we can sell a Sefer Torah to pay for somebody who has no other money in order to properly provide for a household. What does that mean? He doesn't say it over here, but he does say a few things. He says, a person for example, can't use the money to pay for his children's limud Torah because that's not considered tzedakah. That's considered an obligation. Okay, so you can't do that. Okay, so you can't keep it for yourself if you're going to teach them Torah. You can't hire somebody else to do that. You also can't use maaser money to pay off your debts. Okay. If you did this for other people, though, that would be fine. And so that's what we're saying here. So if it came to a place where we have this extra Sefer Torah to have this chuppah, but if we gave tzedakah to the people to have the chuppah, we wouldn't have to do that. That would come first. Okay, so he's not saying anything like that. But the idea is that if a guy didn't have svarim to learn from and you bought him svarim with your maaser money, that's tzedakah. That's no one's going to disagree with that. The question is, if you buy it, like I buy a set of svarim and put it on the bookshelf. Okay, can I use maaser money for that? So that's that's where they're getting a little catchy. Okay, but if you could have given it to people to continue to learn Torah, really, however you want to define it, it's not such a big machlokes. There's lots of different good things you can do with it. So if you're not sure, discuss with your local rav, about the use for it. And if they give you a hard time, just come to me. The third section over here. You should also know that it is proper with maaser money that you should take sort of a middle ground with giving it. Okay? Or giving the 10. But if you want to be generous, then you could do 20%. So maaser is 10%. You could also do 20%. So instead of calling it maaser, it's called chamisha, which is referring to the 1/5. And the rabbis of the Talmud, the Chazal, say it the following way. So it says that kol asher titan li aser rulach. So that's also again by Yaakov Avinu. So it says I'm going to do maaser twice So that would be 1/5. Okay, so with this, we see that if a person wants to give, then the first thing they should take from is from sort of like their general earnings, and then you can skim a little more off the top of the profits. Okay, and the main thing of spreading out this money is to give half from each one, from your gross earnings and then from your profits. Okay, and then what you should do is to spread them out in the following way, says the Ahavas Chaim. So your first separation of maaser should go to people learning Torah. Okay, why? Because that's like maaser rishon that was given to the Levium and the Kohanim. Okay, really just for the Levium, it's maaser rishon because Truma wasn't comes, but he says maaser rishon. Okay, but the point was to give it to them so that way they could continue learning Torah. Okay, and he says that this was the statement of the Shita Mikubetzes I mentioned earlier. And now, in the fourth thing you can do with this money, he says he's going to explain another point, which is something that touches all aspects of tzedakah. When we say that 20% is a nice donation, okay, that's when you don't know the person. So it's just there's a lot of the needs of the poor, and they need food. Great. Or people who are basically clothing the naked, as he says here literally. People who have needs for food, they have needs for clothing. Okay? And you also know that there's women who are widowed, and there are children who are parentless, and people who are in the most dire straits like this. They have no ability to save themselves. Then a person could technically be required to actually give up to 20% of their own money to basically house, feed, and clothe one of these people. And he quotes the Vilna Gaon, which is that when a person is able to give that amount, they are obligated to give that amount to another person who is in dire straits. But a person is not required to become bereft of comforts of themselves. Okay, it's only a mitzvah. Okay, and this is a really important point that's made. So there's a whole shit that can be given. I'm not sure if I've given it. It's nothing not on this channel, but I have given it in the past about a mitzvah, what's known as Dei Machsoro. There's a mitzvah to give a person sort of minimum expected benefits, which is to give them a place to live, with a table, a chair, and a bed, and some lights, and they have to have a certain amount of food. And these are things that a person can expect to request from the community, but they can also expect to ask it from a person. So there is the mitzvah of what's known as Dei Machsoro Asher Yachasar Lo. It's a pasuk in Mishpatim. And so whatever is needed for their daily comfort, to solve the problem of both homelessness, poverty, starvation, those are considered the bare necessities. So now the Ahavas Chaim continues. He says, so that would be like the mitzvah to do. If you can afford that, you should do it. Like if you can afford to give somebody, let's say in modern times, $20,000 for the year to pay for them to have basic living expenses and basic food. If that's all that it was, you should feel like that's what you should do with it. You should do with that. Okay. Now the question is, give that to that technically, he doesn't say this, but technically speaking, a person who's in that dire circumstance would take precedence over the limud of Torah, because Dei Machsoro is a mitzvah that is chiyuvis, meaning it's something that is a person who is in the most. It's considered a most dire situation. That would take precedence, and then you could go back and start giving money to people who learn Torah. You can't leave a person out on the street so that these guys sit and learn Torah. That's not how it works. So we find further, the Ahavas Chaim says over here, that a person should not give more than 20%. This is really important. Okay, because the Gemara says, this is a Gemara in Ksubis, it's Daf 50a. It's Nun Amud Aleph. So the case is where what is considered midas chasidus for giving, and it says that it's just a good idea to do, and that the person should stop as they spread out the mavaz bays that we were talking about before, is the case we're talking about, should stop at 20%. And the reason why you can't give more than that, because if you do more, you're putting yourself in danger. And how much more so, since some poskim like the Rambam say that the 20% that you're giving comes from only above and beyond what you need to run your businesses and to maintain your lifestyle. Okay? So, but some places, like the Yerushalmi seems to say that no, it's more than that, but the Rambam disagrees with the Yerushalmi that there was a separate arrangement when the Sanhedrin went to the town of Usha, northern Israel, and a person should stop at 20%. Okay, and that is what the rule became. Okay, and so since Talmud itself is only saying that, it sounds like a really nice thing to do, and it's much more clear than what the Yerushalmi is saying. The Talmud Bav, also being the later one, should take the precedence about the explanation. And a person is really just giving away a ton of his stuff. And that same person is seeking out the poor, looking to do lots of mitzvahs and giving them lots of charity. And he should continue to do that. And so therefore 20% is a good idea and also should only be from profits. But the Ahavas Chaim points out that most other Rishonim don't mention this. Okay, and that the 20% stops at whatever it is that you want to stop at. Okay, so therefore you have therefore a lot of them follow the opinion of the Yerushalmi that you have to give the 20%. Okay, as long as you can afford it. And here he begins to mention the mitzvah of Dei Machzoro Aser Yachasar Lo. Okay, is to say that that's why you need to be able to focus on how much you're giving, which we stated last week's chapter, knowing how much you have, how much you're giving. You got to see what you need and what you can afford above and beyond your own requirements. And the profits that go above that in your account, you really should be giving to a person, especially that who has the most desperate of needs. Okay? And when they said that they were going to talk about giving money, they were talking about a situation of desperate needs, of Dei Machzoro, a person who was bereft of pretty much everything, of housing, clothing, and foods. The Ahavas Chaim continues in saying that the Yerushalmi is also explicit. So the Yerushalmi is, again, the earlier version of the Talmud that was not as popular as the Bavli. Okay, and so they seem to imply that originally the rule that we said that you should give 20% was actually given to Moshe at Sinai. And the rabbis came and reenacted it in Usha. Okay? And so it seems like, according to them, as it says further, that if you don't give them this amount, you haven't really fulfilled the mitzvah at all. Okay? So you have to give a certain sort of basic amount. However, Maimonides, the Rambam, says that where there are still lots of poor people, then this amount of Dei Machzoro is still limited by 20%. Okay? Now, if you are super, super pious, you could probably go beyond that. Okay? But the Rambam says, based on his understanding of our Gemara, that if a person who was hiding money from the Gabbai Tzedakah, okay, so they should try to seek them out and to collect as so that way they can properly fulfill the mitzvah. Okay, now the Ahavas Chaim says the reason why he was hiding out in this case was because he had already given his 20%. and so the need for the poor exceeded that amount, and so therefore, as an expression of absolute general piety, he gave more. But he was trying to say that the Maimonides is used as a proof that nonetheless you should have stopped at 20%, and also because he says it says that when you're giving the emachzor mi kol asher lo, from not all of it. So it's any normal people, and that's what we're saying is that therefore there has to be some reasonable limit. Okay, and so also we say that also means to say that a person should give more money to the needs of the poor, more so than giving to the needs of Hashem. Okay, even to the temple, and especially to things like Torah scholars, because the Torah is basically saying that you have to try to give as much of your possessions to help to support the poor, so they don't become too desperate because they need it. However, nonetheless, your own life takes precedence over your friends, so you shouldn't have to become destitute as a result of giving tzedakah. Okay, so even though we've said in other places previously, like there's no limit to how much chesed you can do, there's no limit to how much tzedakah you can do. That's assuming that you are able to keep things for yourself. So, for example, a person couldn't go ahead and dedicate all of his field as truma to the kohanim. It had to be a certain unlimited amount, and even the Yerushalmi agrees to this as well. And he goes on and on and on about different ways in which money was distributed, and what's the best use of it. And so he says the Vilna Gaon writes an interesting statement in a very holy letter of his called Alim Trufa, right? The leaves that are left over. So he writes the following in this sort of last will and testament. He says that you should separate, as you said before, that you should separate this 20% as I've recommended, and don't make it less, because every moment that you don't do it, you are as if you're violating a number of violations of Torah. It's just not lending when you're supposed to lend, and that you're also supposed to give. You should certainly give. All the other cases that we've mentioned before in this whole section over here. And so that's why he feels that since there's so many mitzvahs connected to tzedakah, therefore 20% allows you to have said, I have fulfilled every mitzvah, and I have not been lax in fulfilling any of these mitzvahs of tzedakah, since there's so many different cases of it. Okay, and that's what he quotes from there. And so that's why they have stressed. That's why the Ahavas Chaim over here is stressing that's why really up to 20%, really, as long as there's still the needs of the poor, is something that you need to focus on giving. In many ways, that puts the Vilna Gaon in the same category as the Rambam, that whenever there's poor people, 20% is the limit, not like at Yerushalmi. Okay? So that seems to put them in the same category. I'm going to sort of migrate ahead over here. So this tzedakah is also used to redeem people who have been captured. It's called Pidyon Shvuyim. Okay? And we talked about this a long time ago when we first talked about this. So as long as you still have a number of poor people in the town, the Rambam would say that you still have to continue giving money, and that's the opinion of the Rambam and the Vilna Gaon. Okay, and the Ahavas Chaim, I side with this opinion. Okay, however, there's one thing we have to understand, which is that the idea is that which is something that is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch as well. You don't have to give tzedakah in every single case. Sometimes there's some cases where maybe you don't have to give it. Okay? And that issue is going to be based on the fact of whether or not you can afford it. Okay? So you give as much as you can, and you should be giving up to 20%. But if you start to notice you really can't afford to keep giving this tzedakah, you should stop. But if you can continue to afford it, you should continue and not stop. So in a sense, you should feel like there's always a sense of needing to give until you get to 20%. Okay? And if you find that you just aren't able to give anymore, then you should be careful with what you're giving. Okay, and he says, and that's based on what we just said, which is there's a number of prohibitions and statements that can hold you back from having to do that. And he also says that the reason why you should keep track of this is because you don't want to be accused of having an ayin ra'ah, that you have some negative attitude towards it, like we said several chapters ago about these different things that detract from giving tzedakah. And instead, you should focus on giving more. Okay? And he quotes from the Rabbeinu Yerucham, who says that even for a mitzvah overis, a mitzvah that has only very narrow time in which it applies, a person still doesn't have to give all the money into that in one shot. Okay? And so therefore, which is to say that the opposite of what we're saying, which is that you have to give it because it's like if you don't give it, it's a violation. But that's not what it means. That's not true, because meaning like all tzedakah, you should try to do it as frequently as possible, especially when you look at it as a function of right now. So if you have the money right now and you could give more, you should feel like you can give more, but you do have time throughout the year to continue to contribute. And so that's why it's considered possibly that you're going to miss out on a mitzvah, which is why the Vilna Gaon is very strict about saying, make sure you have the 20%. But if you're not sure if you're going to have enough, you can withhold a little bit, as long as by the end of the year you see that you haven't withheld. Okay? So that's what the Rabbeinu Yerucham is saying. However, it seems like according to the Rambam and the Gra, that one should feel like they have an impetus to give right now. So we're going to talk more about this in the next section about what to do with someone who wants to give lots of tzedakah. We will pick that up next week. Have a wonderful day.